In this lesson, you're going to learn how to integrate time into the chat application. So along with every single message that shows up in the browser, you'll also see the time at which it was sent. So in this lesson, we're going to focus on figuring out how to generate timestamps, how to transfer them between client and server, and how to format them in a way that's useful for the users of our chat application. Now, to kick things off, what I want to focus on is how we are going to generate timestamps. We can actually do that using built-in JavaScript functionality. So in the console down below, let's take a look at the 12 or so characters necessary to get this done. Now, the first thing we need to do is create a new date object. So right here, we can just go ahead and create a constant. We can call it whatever we'd like. For example, I could call it now. And then we're going to generate a new date. And to do that, we use the new operator with the date constructor function. That is capital D date. We call it providing no arguments as none are necessary. Now, when we do this, it's going to generate a new date object that represents the current point in time whenever we run the code. It's going to store that in now, and we can use now to work with that time. So right here, we've executed it, storing a value in now, and now we have access to all of the methods that date provides. If you pull up the MDN documentation, you can get a complete list of all of these. Let's go ahead and walk through a couple. So for example, right here, now.toString. This is going to show a string representation of that date. In this case, it was the date created a few seconds ago, and all of this information is indeed accurate for the current time and where I am in the world. Now, don't worry, we're not going to show all of this information to the user in the chat app. We'll be formatting it to just show them the information that would be useful. Now, another method we could use is now.right here getDate. This is one of many methods that allows you to extract individual parts of the date, and in this case, getDate allows you to extract the day of the month, right here, 31 aligning. There are other methods you can use to extract other pieces of that date, such as the number of seconds or hours. The other method that we're going to use, and the one we're actually going to integrate into our code, is called getTime. So let's take a quick moment to run that. Right here, it is now.getTime. I'm going to execute it, and what do we get back? We get back a really big number. Now, this value, this number, is a timestamp. It is the representation of that point in time up above. It is the number of milliseconds since January 1st at midnight of the year 1970. That point in time is also known as the Unix epoch. So the number 0 represents that point in time. Positive numbers are in the future from that point in time, and negative numbers go into the past. So here I have a very large positive number because it has been quite a few years since 1970. I would have a very large negative number if I was trying to get a timestamp for something like the start of World War I as an example. Now in this case, we have the timestamp, and timestamps are great for transferring between systems because it is nothing more than a number, and this number is universally understood by pretty much every programming language out there, including JavaScript, so it's really easy to work with. What we're going to do is use this exact same code on the server to generate timestamps, numbers, for each and every message that the server sends to the client. The client will then receive that message, and it will be able to use the message text like we have above, as well as the timestamp, and we'll talk about how we can format that to make it look a bit nicer and a bit more useful for humans. So let's get started by generating that timestamp on the server. Inside of Visual Studio Code, we'll be kicking things off in index.js. Now in index.js, we're going to focus on the message event at first. We'll be ignoring the location message event for now. Now we emit the message event from 4 different places. Right here, I emit it twice, once to the user who's joining and once to everyone else. Down below, I emit the message event to send a user's message to all other connected users. And finally, at the bottom, I emit a message when someone leaves the chat room. Now, in this case, we have 4 different places where we need to set up the date, and that's going to require us to have a lot of duplicate code. So the better solution would be to create a separate function that can get all of this done for us. Now, when it comes to emitting the message event, we are going to need to provide more than just a single value. Now, when we need to emit an event with more than a single value, we have 2 options. We can, 1, provide more arguments, for example, adding the timestamp over here as another argument to emit, or we could choose to just emit a single piece of data, an object, with everything on there as a property. For example, I could have a message property on the object to store this text, and I could have a created@at property on there to store the timestamp, and that's the approach that we're going to take. So right here, we're changing 2 things. 1, we are going to send objects back instead of just sending back strings when we emit the message. And we're also going to create a function that generates that object for us so we don't have to add the same code over and over again. Let's go ahead and see what this is going to look like before we create it. So right here for the welcome event, I'm going to remove this string. We're going to provide an object instead, and this object will have a text property with that message, welcome, exactly like we had before. We're also going to send back something like created@, setting up a new date right here using the getTime method to get the timestamp. Now, I could have stored this in a variable first and then used getTime. That's what we did in the terminal, but I could chain the method on right here to get all of this done at once. So in the end of the day, this is the sort of thing we want to be sending from the server to the client. Now, once again, we're going to create a function that generates this object for us, so I don't have to type this out every single time I want to send a message from the server to the client. I want to put all of this logic into a single function I can use and reuse. So what I'm going to do is create a new file in the source directory. Actually, I'm going to create a new directory in the source directory. I'll go ahead and call this something like utils, and in the utils directory, we'll make our new file. And for this one, I could call it something like messages.js. This is going to be a pretty simple file, which is focused on defining a few functions that are going to generate those message objects. Right now, it's just text and created@, but as we progress through the section, we'll be adding even more data on. For example, eventually we'll have usernames for our users, and we'll need to transfer that as well. So let's go ahead and get started by defining our first function. Right here, let's create a new constant for our function. I'll call it something like generateMessage. And we'll set it up as an arrow function, and there's not a whole lot to this one. We're going to accept the message text in as the first and only parameter for the moment. Others will come later on. And then down below, all we're going to do is return an object. Now right here, we are going to set up the properties we want to transfer. Of course, I do want to transfer the text, so I will set that text property up, getting its value from the parameter value above. And then I'll also set up created@, or something similarly named. And right here, we're going to use that exact same code. We create a new date, and we use getTime to get the timestamp. Now, if we export that from this file, other files like index.js will be able to use it. So module.exports equals a new object, since we will be adding other functions in later. And right here, generateMessage is the particular thing we're trying to export right now. So with this in place, we can call generateMessage with our text instead of needing to generate the object in line in index.js. That's going to reduce the amount of duplicate code we have, keeping things nice and clean. So from here, let's go ahead and load that function in. Up above, we need to require that file. So I'll set up a require call that is ./utils/messages, and we are going to create a constant to grab that function. Now we know that require is going to return that object that we exported. Right here, I'll use destructuring like we've done before to grab the one property off of there I want and store it as a standalone variable. In this case, it is generate message perfect. So now that we have this in place, we can replace the object we created with a much simpler solution. Instead of defining the whole object here, we simply call generate message. This generates the object and passes it in as the second argument to emit. And remember, we have to provide the text right here for this one that happened to be welcome. Now that we have this in place, let's go ahead and actually adjust the client to get it to work with the new structure. Before, the client was expecting a single value to come back a string. Now it's getting an object, which means that things are broken. If I refresh the browser, what do we see? I see that it's trying to represent that object as HTML, which results in the following. We need to go ahead and adjust that client-side code. So over in chat.js right here, we are passing the entire object in as the property value for a message. We are going to set up the message property, but instead we need to grab text off of this. This right here, the message parameter, it's now an object. So that means message.text. With this in place, things should be restored to their working order. If I refresh the browser, I would expect to see my welcome message, and that's exactly what I'm getting. In addition, though, I can see I'm also getting that created at timestamp, which is excellent. We can use that to display the time up above. Now, we only made that change for one of the 4 places where we emit the message event, so let's take a quick moment to add it for the others. For example, right here, we'll go ahead and cut this string out, copying it to the clipboard. Then I'm going to go ahead and call generate message, passing that string in as the first and only argument, and we'll do something similar down below for sending the message to all connected users. Right here, I'll remove the message variable. I'll call generate message, passing it in, restoring order to the world, and finally we have disconnect. I'm going to take this string, copy it to the clipboard, and remove it from its current location. I'll call generate message, passing in the string once again, and now every single time the server emits a message event, it's emitting an object. We use a single function to create that object, so we know it's going to follow a nice standardized format. That means over here in chat.js, our code's never going to break because message is always going to be an object. With this in place, let's go ahead and integrate the timestamp into the template. So in index.html, I'm going to make a change to the message template up above. Right here, before the message, we're going to add a little bit of code. What I'm going to do is open and close another set of 2 curly braces, and I'm going to reference something like created at. Now we're currently not passing that in, but it's okay. We'll just provide it right here. Later on in the section, when we focus on styling our app, we'll adjust where the date shows up. But for now, this is a great place to get started. Then I'll have a space followed by a hyphen, followed by another space, and then the message. So with this in place, we can save index.html, and all we need to do is make sure that this template gets access to some piece of data named created at. So over inside of chat.js, right here, we have to add created at into the mix. And I'm going to get it off of the message object. There is a property on there called created at, which is what we want access to. Now, with this current setup, we're going to have a number print in the browser. That number is not useful for humans as it makes no sense whatsoever, and that is where the moment library comes into place. JavaScript does provide infrastructure for working with dates, and it's not very good when it comes to formatting. It does not give you an easy way to format your dates in a way that you might want. For example, maybe I want to say that something happened 3 hours ago based off of its timestamp, or maybe I want to extract just the month as the shorthand. That would be Jan for January and Feb for February, so on and so forth. JavaScript doesn't give you anything good to get that done. You'd end up writing a bunch of code yourself, and that's where the moment library comes into place. It gives us all of the tools necessary to format time. Now let's go ahead and pull up the documentation real quick. You can find it over at momentjs.com. Here we are going to head over to the documentation page. And once again, there are so many things that Moment can do. We're only going to use a very small part of its feature set. For example, under Manipulate, you can learn how to manipulate time, adding or removing weeks or hours or seconds. What we're going to focus on, though, out of all of these options is just display. Our goal is to use Moment to display time in a way that makes sense for our application. And to do this, Moment provides a format method. We can provide no arguments and it will find a nice default, or we can provide a string. This string is a pattern of tokens, and those tokens allow us to customize how the date shows up. So for example, down below, we have tokens for month. I have 5 different ways I can represent the month, and I can see the example outputs over here. So if I wanted to show Jan or DEC for December, that's not a real word, I shouldn't have tried to pronounce it, I would use 3 M's in my pattern. Those 3 M's would be replaced with the correct values. There's values and tokens for other things as well. If I keep scrolling down, we have AM, PM, hour, minute, and second, all of which we can use to get time showing up as we see fit. So let's go ahead and actually use this format method with some of these tokens to get our date showing up correctly. Right here, what we're going to do is remove the value we currently have for created at, and we are going to call the moment function that's provided by the moment library we loaded in. Remember, in index.html, you already grabbed that script tag when you grabbed the mustache library a few videos ago. Now we can go ahead and call it, passing to it our timestamp. So right here, that is message.createdAt. And then we can go ahead and call format. Now, as mentioned, you can call format with no arguments, but it's probably not going to show you what you want. We can take a quick peek at what exactly we get by default. It contains a bunch of information in a way that's not necessarily what we want. Instead, we're going to provide our own string pattern using just the tokens that we actually want to have show up. So there's no need to show the year or the month if those things don't make sense for your purposes. And in our case, that's true. All I really want to show is the hour, the minute, and AM or PM. Now down below for hour, there are options for a 24-hour clock or a 12-hour clock, so feel free to use a pattern that makes sense for where you are in the world. For me, what I'm going to do is use a single H. That is the hour from 1 to 12 without a padding up front. 2 H's adds that padding, making sure it's always 2 characters. That's not something I need. So right here, over inside of format, all I do is pass in a string and I type the letter H. That character or token will be replaced with the correct value. What I'm going to do is save chat.js and test things out before we go any further. Over inside of the browser, I'll just give things a quick refresh to generate a new welcome message. And right here, I have 11. And that is correct for the hour. It is 11 something AM. It's 11:59, so almost 12. Next up, we're going to add a couple of other tokens into the mix. I'm going to show the minute with 2 characters always, so 00 instead of just 0 or 59. They have great examples for all of the tokens, so you know what you're going to get. Over here, we're going to do just that, showing the minute. Now I'm going to put a colon between the hour and the minute, and colon is not a special token, and tokens that aren't special stay as they are, so Moment's not going to do anything with that. It'll show up as is between the correct hour and the correct minute. Next up, a space followed by either AM or PM. So over here, we have AM or PM. I have uppercase A for uppercase AM or PM and lowercase a for the lowercase version. Right here, I'll stick with the lowercase version. So for me, that's just a lowercase a. Whoops, let's put that inside of the string. Perfect. Now with this in place, we have a great system for getting the time from the server to the client and having the client format the time in a way that is useful for users of the application. What I'm going to do is head back over to the browser. By now, it should be 12 something, and if I refresh it, I can see that it is 12 p.m. exactly. Now I believe it's 12:01, I'll give things a refresh, and now I'm seeing that. Down below, if I were to add other messages into the mix, I would expect those to have timestamps as well, and that is exactly what we're seeing right here. So now we have timestamps set up for our standard messages, though we don't have anything like that set up for our location-based messages. We'll focus on tackling that in the next lesson, so stay tuned, and I'll see you then.